Yo, I'm Gada and I'm developing a game in Solo. And this month, I took everything I learned last month about environment art and I started for real to work on the art for the first level. And I can say I finally have a decent workflow. So here's how I'm tackling this. First of all, I work on a blocky version of the landscape with gray material and placeholders meshes. I do a first pass in Unreal with the landscape tools to quickly sculpt a simplified terrain using the landscape blueprint brushes. Blocking it in Unreal allows me to quickly jump in game anytime and appreciate distances or composition from a player point of view. When I have something I'm happy with, I bring it into Blender and start dressing it with big placeholder assets. I chose to set up the placeholder in Blender rather than doing it in Unreal because I will start sculpting those props later on, and it's much more easier to do so in Blender. So it's better to do the placement in Blender too, so assets will already be in place when I'll start sculpting. And I can still tweak the landscape mesh if I need to. When this pass has been done, I send everything in Houdini to refine the landscape. Using the Erode tool, I can quickly detail the terrain by applying hydro and thermal erosion simulation. And since I also imported the blocky assets for cliff and rocks, I can make the erosion conform to those props. What I also love in Houdini is the amount of control I can have. For example, while erosion can add a lot of very nice details to the landscape mesh, it might not be something I want in places where the player can walk, especially in areas with combat. The gameplay is based on a fast-paced combat system with a lot of quick movement and quick dashes, and an uneven terrain, while it can look more natural, can also cause collision and navigation issues. You don't want to see your character cancel its dash because it hit a bump in the terrain. So in Houdini, I can mask those gameplay area zones and exclude them from erosion so it can stay flat and smooth. By the way, I'm posting a video every month to talk about the progress of this game and my reflections as a solo game dev. So if you find those devlog type video interesting and want to support me, please like this video and consider subscribing to this channel. That's the best way for you to never miss a new video and support me in my journey. Back to level art. I also started sculpting properly those rock and cliff props, and that's probably what took me the longest this month. I had to redo the first cliff. I did something like 3 times because I was trying to nail the overall art direction for level art. I'm looking for a stylized look, but I knew I didn't want the style to be too simplified. I still wanted to have my environment filled with nice details. And so, like I mentioned in the previous recap, my initial approach was to look at scan asset library and run a stylized filter to blur the mesh while sharpening the edges. I had some decent results at first, but even if the Megascan library is already large, it's still difficult to find an asset with the exact shape I'm looking for. So I started to experiment with kit bashing several assets together until it forms the volume I needed. But in the end, it looks too chaotic and it was more time consuming than I thought it would be. And that's a perfect example of one of my many flaws. I always try to build workflow that theoretically should help me save time, but often end up being too complex and unpractical. And finally realized that it would have been quicker if I did it by hand from scratch. And I think the Stylizing scan asset workflow is one of those instances. So I end up redoing everything by hand. And guess what? Yeah, it's time consuming, but not as much as my previous method, and I prefer the end result. So that's what I did. Starting in Blender and using instance geometries, I refined the blocky placeholder asset directly in place so I can quickly preview the look with turn. Then, when I'm ready, I import the mesh in ZBrush and keep detailing and refining even more. That's the part that took the most time, but that's also arguably the most fun part. And for some suited assets, and because I never change and always need at some point to complexify a workflow that feels too simple, I tested the use of erosion simulation in Houdini, even for actual assets meshes, before finalizing the look in ZBrush. And I think it was actually a neat trick this time. When the sculpt pass is done, it's time to transform this into a game-ready mesh. Since those rocks have a very organic shape, and since I'll be using nanite in Unreal, I can simply use a decimation filter in ZBrush to reduce the poly count. Then back to Houdini, where I created a quick setup to clean up the mesh in automatic UVs with Udemy support, and that's all it takes to convert a high-res asset into a game-ready one. time to work on textures. So inside Substance Painter, I bake all the needed maps like normal map, AO, cavity, etc. and use it with some noise textures to blend a bunch of color. And I also like to use the slope blur filter to give a painterly effect. And that's it. I have everything I need in Unreal, the mesh and textures, and I can import everything, create a material, assign the texture, and voila. As for the texture of the terrain itself, when I'm simulating erosion in Houdini, I can also generate masks for different geological features like debris, sediments, or water path. Using those masks in Unreal Material, I can blend different tileable textures to get a natural look. And to create those textures, this time I went back to the idea of using a library of scan assets that I run through a filter to stylize it. It's much easier to stylize a 2D texture than a 3D mesh actually, so I feel it's making more sense here. The stylization is done in Substance Designer using a couple of slope blur nodes. I just had to build my own little custom nodes that automate the process, and then it's just a matter of picking a nice material in Megascan and pass it through my own recipe. Finally, what takes me the longer is to adjust the color to fit my environment. And that's it. I can import it in Unreal, plug it into my landscape material, and in just a couple of clicks, I can add a new surface to my terrain. And after all this work, this is the result I'm getting. I just ended up adding a post-process filter to enhance the painterly feel of the overall image. I'm finally happy with the look of the environment. I think I struck a good balance between a high level of detail and a nice stylized and illustration feel. Now that I have a tested workflow and a clearer art direction to follow, next month I start to fill the level with more assets and details everywhere. I will also have to think of how I want to tackle the vegetation, since I also want to apply the same philosophy of stylized yet highly detailed style. And that's it for this recap. I hope you enjoyed this type of devlog where I'm reporting the progress of my game by going a bit deeper in the technical part. Hopefully you'll find it interesting to see how much is involved in the creation of a game, and if you do, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your support is always super appreciated. Thank you and see you soon.